I'm Jennifer Gilmour and I'm an author and advocate for women in abusive relationships. I want to get to the answers to the questions that many have from those that work in the domestic abuse sector, getting an inside feel of what it's really like in their job role and sharing it with all of you. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Abuse Talk podcast. And I'm here with Viv Bickham, which I'm actually really excited about. We've just spoken to each other as if we've known each other forever. And I guess it is like that in the digital world, isn't it? So we've probably been tweeting each other for quite a few years, and I've followed your work for quite some time. So it's really nice to have you. And I should actually say Vivien Bickham MBE, shouldn't I? So
that's a very nice introduction, Jennifer.
No worries. Well, I obviously wanted to bring you on because I was just looking around and I thought, I keep seeing you pop up online and I should really just get you on the podcast because you have had such a journey. And I asked you to send me your bio and I was just blown away even more so. So I thought what would be really nice is if you take us on a bit of your career journey really and share some of your experiences. So I guess I would love to hear where it started, and if you want to tell everybody a bit about you obviously in that process, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, that's really good. I have to say, within my family home, we're a very close family. We're a very large family. There's 6 children, and my mum and dad were married for nearly 50 years before, unfortunately, my mum died. And my mum had quite a lot of health issues that affected us as a family, but it allowed us to develop that resilience and closeness of attachment with each other. So when obviously I'd started in this work, and that was led really because my best friend that we'd grown up through secondary school primarily together from first year, we'd been friends. She met a guy from Canada who was working in the local area. My friend Gillian, we used to go out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, and we used to dance and literally dance from when the nightclub opened till closing doors. And we used to have really silly tricks on any blokes that tried to, and we used to call it the bull ring, where they would like be on the outside and then they'd come on and go, do you want to dance? And we go, well, we're dancing, that's what we do. And we used to be terrible. And the DJs who knew us would say, lads, don't ever dance with them because they will just, make fools of you. And we used to do. Gillian was really good looking, and she would go at the front and do quite a sexy dance because she was dead slim and everything. And I would go behind and undo the buttons, take the shirts off, and then pull the pants down so they couldn't run away. And honestly, we had such a reputation in all the discos that people just said, don't ever dance with them because they're here to dance. And Gillian would do the disco dancing competitions because it was that time in like the late 70s, 80s, when obviously, the John Travolta was around and all that. So we did these dancing competitions, and Gillian always won. She was absolutely amazing. And we met Raymond, Jules. He appeared really polite, opened doors, pulled a chair out to make us, allow her to sit down, would pay for everything, and was very affectionate and everything. And Gillian just said, oh God, I feel like I've just, won the, we didn't have the lottery then, but won, spot the ball it was in our day. And he persuaded her to move to Canada, to Toronto. And when she moved there, she rang me and said something's not quite right. His attitude has changed. I'm not really sure about things. And I was saying, well, you can always come back. Your mum and dad have always said you can always come back. And unbeknown to us at that point, she'd travelled across Canada to see his mum and ask for help from his mum. And what we understand was that she just said, look, he's got a mental illness. You need to, sort him out and everything. So Gillian went back and he found out that she'd been to see his mum. And at that point, what Gillian didn't know was that he was actually diagnosed as a schizophrenic.
Right.
And what we understand is that an argument happened. The neighbour who lived underneath them heard the argument and this crash. And what we understand is that he'd pushed her and there was a head injury, a severe head injury on Gillian that then resulted, because she wasn't a Canadian citizen, she was then taken by ambulance, but she had to go to a charity hospital because she wasn't a Canadian citizen. And the delay meant that obviously the damage to her brain and everything was quite severe. And then as a result of that, Gillian came back to obviously back home and was looked after by her mum and dad, but ended up in a vegetative state for nearly 23 years. And certainly at the outset, the expectation was that she would only live 3 to 5 years. So it was the dedication of her mum and her family, really, that, allowed her to live for so long. Yeah. Initially, he wasn't going to be charged or anything like that. And then the Toronto's, they have like a criminal injuries board. They shoved it back to court, and he ended up with 3 months jail and 18 months probation for the assault. But when Gillian actually died, the coroner at the time, Michael Singleton, said that he recorded a verdict of unlawful killing and actually asked the Canadian police to reopen it as a murder investigation. But then they said that they couldn't because so much time had elapsed, and that their law of double jeopardy forbids a person for being prosecuted twice. And again, what they said was that they couldn't find where he was or what he, or anything like that at that time. But Gillian's passion for life and, just a passion for, her just living and everything else was obviously robbed from her, by her asking for help. And it, for me, it just didn't seem right. So I got involved with victim support at that time and became a volunteer visitor for them. And then a job came up with, at that time, Blackburn-Dowan District Women's Aid. And I went on to work for them and expanded the service from 1 refuge to 3 refuges. And we had a lot of accolade in being really at the forefront of change. We had the Wish Centre, which was one of the first multi-agency drop-in centres where we had a domestic abuse officer come, somebody from housing. And I can only say that without the help at that time of another friend who is just amazing, Linda Thompson, she taught me absolutely everything about domestic abuse, and obviously how it impacts not just on women but on children. And actually, Linda was the one who's set up virtually every refuge. She's so good at getting a good bargain basement deal. And she's incredible. And I've said when I go for my MBE, she's coming with me, because without her influence, I certainly
Oh.
would not have achieved so much. She was just incredible. Like I say, I couldn't have achieved half of what I have without her influence, particularly as well, around that.
Well, I mean, like, we just started that whole conversation, laughing about, the memories. And, I felt like I could visualize you two dancing that way. And then the conversation turned, and I knew it was coming, but you still don't want to believe that something like this can happen to another person. And it's clearly been the passion and the drive for you to take those steps, and become who you are today, really, and the work that you do to help other people. So I guess in a way that I've kind of been saying that the pain has become a purpose, but I don't want to put that to you. I find that anybody I come across that is working in the sector has a link somehow, and I think that drives that person to, be passionate and to help and to sort of continue those steps forward to, helping other people that are going through it. And I'm sure that you will have. Gillian was the beginning of that journey, but there'll have been so many experiences that you have witnessed, and stories and of those women and men going through domestic abuse. So how do you cope? Because I don't know how you managed to do that. Obviously, it being really close and raw. How do you manage that emotionally?
For me, part of it is I think of obviously the good times that we had, and keep that perspective. I remember the phone call from her like it was yesterday, where she rang and just said, "There's just something not right." And even now, when I'm talking about it, the hairs on my arm stand up, because I can hear her voice saying, "I really just don't know what to do." And I've never felt like so immobilized in my life. But I think one of the passions that keep me going is working, with agencies like Safe Lives, who do the Reaching In project that, they started during COVID, doing things that you think actually can make a difference. And I think that gives me a balance. The other aspect is I am very blessed in that my own family are really supportive, and I get a lot of joy from seeing them happy and everything else. A lot is about self-care and recognizing, when that trigger happens, sometimes they recognize that I just have to go and be on my own and do that aspect. For me, I'm a real believer in hypnotherapy. And again, this is perhaps a bit of a distraction, Jennifer, but I would love to hypnotize perpetrators. And we did a bit of a pilot once when we were working when I was working at Changing Lives, and the feedback was really positive. And I always think, particularly, being able to do self-hypnosis, do calming, grounding techniques, really just, gives me an aspect of, I have a lot of gratitude in my life. And, that is what keeps me, I think, purposeful on. There is, some aspects of life which are horrendous. But actually, and my mum was a real believer in this, in justice.
Mm.
My mum was from Belgium, and when she was young, she was very olive-skinned and got to the grammar school, but she was never allowed on the photographs at the grammar school because of her skin colour. So she was a real advocate in, you've got to, accept people for who they are. You've got to, be equal and diverse and everything else. And, there's always a backstory
Mm.
to things. So, don't, like, people say, don't judge a book by its cover.
Mm.
Let's get behind what's actually going on for somebody. And I
Mm.
think as I've developed throughout my career and done aspects of different therapeutic training, etc., that gets a real understanding of, we all have boulders that we drag along sometimes. And it's, sometimes having the key to, cut the cord and let it go. And I've certainly seen the benefit of that through therapeutic intervention. And, I think that's what gives me hope all the time, that when people
Mm.
say, oh, I'll never get over this, well, actually, there are options, and never say never. And that was, I always remember my mum saying that, never say never, Vivien. There's always opportunity, there's always hope. And I
Yeah.
think that's a principle that I really value and believe in.
Yeah, so my husband used to say to me, because I ended up in a relationship with him pretty much straight after my abusive one had ended. But he was like a hero, so that's fine. He looked after me, he was a friend. And he used to say to me, even the word hopeless has the word hope in it. And it sounds so corny and cheesy when I think about it now. But I remember this energy that it gave me, to think, I can get on a little bit further. And there is quite a lot of material out there. And I don't know what you think about this, but I find that if you look for it, you can find it. So I self-referred myself to go on the recovery toolkit in Hull, which is, they've called it the Brave program here. I self-referred myself, which they said is so unusual to do, but I was obviously willing and needing that support. But if you don't put yourself out there, I find it's quite difficult to find support, because you wouldn't necessarily think it was abuse. You've got to
Mm.
actually realize that it was an abusive relationship, and this was abnormal, especially for things like emotional abuse, coercive control. You might actually end that relationship might end, and you might go years before recognizing that that is a wrong type of
Mm.
behavior and the depths it has taken on you as a person. So I don't know what you think about accessibility. Obviously, you've got years of experience. How do you find accessibility for victims and for those that have come out of an abusive relationship?
I think we're getting better, and certainly like Sue Penner's program, like the Recovery Toolkit, and the developments that companies like Rockpool do, and develop their strands of accessibility to family models as well. Because I think one of the first things I learned very early on when I worked at Women's Aid was that I was going and talking to women, and they were saying, you're telling me to leave, you're telling me to go into a refuge, but I still love him. I want something for him. And until you can give me that, I don't see what benefit you're going to give me. So I learned very early on, it is about options and choices.
Mm.
I think it's also very much about an education that is tailored to the individual. Because again, when we started initially doing courses, we'd, for survivors of domestic abuse. Well, I'm not going to go to a children's centre and hold my hand up and say, oh, I'm going to write my name down for that one, because then it's out in the public domain that,
Yeah.
I've got trouble at home. So the creativeness and being able to bring it in. We did one. I remember we did a course for the South Asian community, and we called it a health and safety course, because what the people in the community said was, if you mention anything about it's a women only course and everything like that, the men will suspect. So we said, well, you tell us what we could call it. So they said health and safety. So that's what we did. And we then were able to get women to come, and we talked about their health and their safety under the disguise of what abuse is, what constitutes. Because again, when you speak to women initially and talk about coercive control, they have like, what are you talking about? They don't necessarily have an understanding of what gaslighting is. They don't necessarily understand that, because he's ringing me 40 times a day, but he's doing that because he loves me, and it's that change in those perceptions that it's like a trickle feed. You can't just say to somebody, look, that is abuse. They've got to have that self-illumination themselves. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I love that idea, to be honest, of health and safety. It makes perfect sense. And, you put in, especially if somebody's in that relationship, you're putting them at risk, really, by going to a program. And obviously, things have been a lot more difficult now because of COVID.
Yeah.
In terms of actually being able to connect. And obviously you've mentioned Safe Lives reach in. So would you like to sort of elaborate on that for us?
Obviously, one of the things that Safe Lives do is they have pioneers that work with them on, what needs to happen, particularly for those people who are being affected on a daily basis. And obviously during COVID, one of the concerns was that, so many victims and survivors were literally then locked in a house for, in this last lockdown, we're nearly 90 days in. And, how can we make sure that these people have an opportunity? So, just do your neighbourly thing of checking in and just making sure where it's safe to do so. And certainly in Wales, they're doing a bystander consultation at the moment, just to get some feedback around, what else could we do if this ever happens again? Where we can reach in to individuals and just make sure that they're safe, that they've got contact with somebody, that, if there's a safe way to give a signal. And I can remember really, again, quite early on working with a survivor, and her message to her neighbour was, if something was going to kick off, because she knew it would, she'd put the bathroom light on. But she'd flick it so that it flickered, and then it would stay on. So the neighbour would know that there was something going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's really sad, hearing, examples like that, because we just do want people to leave that relationship. And it's really easy on hindsight for me to look back. And I remember I left multiple times, and I went back and I went back. And it's easy for me to look back and say, I know why I did that. But it's also easy to go, this were, there were the red flags, and this is why I did that. And I could have just gone. And it makes it a real struggle when you're supporting a person that's in that relationship, and you do want that realization, don't you? But in a way, and I don't want to say it's the full responsibility of that person, but it had to be me that made that decision to get out. It had to come from me because, like you mentioned, the whole, but he loves me, he's doing that because he's protecting me, he's doing that because he's got my best interests at heart, and nobody in the world will do that for me because that's him, and that's how besotted he is with me. It's really difficult, isn't it, to sort of take yourself away. And I definitely think things like trauma bonding aren't spoken about enough, and then also that it doesn't end when the relationship does. Abuse still can happen, it just changes its form. And it's really a really difficult situation. So I think creative ways, you mentioned creativity in how to address like a program with health and safety. Obviously neighbours have been creative in that way. I think if people can look at it and it become a social thing that we look out for as a society, it would make a huge difference. But we're still not there yet, right? We've got to work and educate and maybe bring it down into the school system, perhaps.
Oh, definitely. And I think the other aspect, and again, this is one of my mantras, Jennifer, is that if we don't do anything with those who harm others, then all they do is go on to the next person. So it costs more to do nothing with them. We need to have a proper strategy on that is safe if people want to stay together, but create that space for action so that individuals can make that choice around the options open to them. And I think one of the other aspects is that is under spoken about is around attachment, and the fact that perpetrators often have attachment issues from their background, and that's why they are like limpets to survivors, in that I cannot live without you because we're attached at the hip, so to speak. And that manipulation and the threat, of coercively controlling them by saying, if you leave me, I'll commit suicide or I'll self-harm myself. All that are issues around their identity, etc. And again, I think we need to educate certainly victim survivors about the different psychologies and typologies of perpetrators, because one size does not fit all. And yet we've got better at, but I still don't think we're there yet. We put everybody through that same funnel. And
I think that's the same with perhaps somebody going through an abusive relationship. Whenever we do anything in regards to forms, it's like tick this box and that box. And for me, so I was in a relationship before the UK law came into place for coercive control. It was also a time when I didn't believe that him sleeping with me in my sleep was rape. I felt that was still a duty as a wife, so I didn't even recognise it. I did recognise his behaviour, but the police, the family support worker, they were completely alien to it in terms of it was so complex, the form of abuse and what I'd experienced, that they didn't really know what to do with the situation and how to support me, really, to be honest. And I think it isn't just as simple as that's an abusive person, that's an abusive relationship, because it's the same behavior, but it's portrayed in different ways. Exactly. And just as you look at personality disorders as well, there's like, I think there's 13 different, I'll have to look up that, to be honest. It's been a while since I've been reading on personalities. And even throwing in a lot recently is the term narcissistic abuse, and that can be used so much in the wrong way. And just like toxic relationships, is it an abusive relationship or is it a toxic relationship? What is the difference between them both? So I do think there's a lot of work to be done in how we develop a society for our younger generations to understand that no, you don't have depression, you're having a low day, or you that is a toxic relationship, it isn't abusive, or vice versa. It's trying to figure out how can we get the right, I suppose, label, but we don't want to label it, right?
Yeah,
I
because
feel like
again,
it's a struggle.
yeah, and I think the thing with labels is that sometimes the people that are labelled then start living up to that label. And I've
Yeah,
seen that particularly with children that are diagnosed with allegedly ADHD,
right.
that I witnessed coming through the refuge. And yet, when they were then in the refuge, they'd calm down. They'd be I used to say to social work students, in 6 weeks, that child will be a completely different child. And they'd come back to me and they'd say, "Do you know, Viv, you were absolutely right." And that child was still being given, obviously, medication to, calm them down and everything else. But it was the environment that they were living in that they were responding to.
Yeah.
I think we live in a society that likes labels, like,
Mm.
they talk about the toxic trio and, people with complex needs. And, I think we need to understand, if somebody hears that, what impact does it have on them? And I think one of the things that we haven't got right yet is the interconnectedness between domestic abuse and the sexual abuse that goes on within that people get shoved into little, well, you can have an IDVA for that, but you've got to have an ISVA for that.
Mm.
And we need to join up a little bit better. There are obviously, the appropriateness for IDVAs and ISVAs, but there are some women that need that interconnectedness of just one contact. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does make sense, and there can be multiple services involved, and sometimes you get on with one person and you're like, I know this person is going to help me, and the other three services that are involved I don't have a link, a connection with as a human being, but yet it's a part of what you have to do. So yeah, there's a long way to go, isn't there? But I mean, we've digressed a bit. Let's talk about your MBE, because I'm assuming you were meant to go and get it. I don't know if has it been delayed?
I was supposed to get it last June,
Yeah.
on June the 2nd,
Oh,
and I'd got a lovely outfit because obviously it would be June and it'd be nice and warm and everything else. And then obviously a few weeks before they just said that obviously everything was on hold, and since then everything has been on hold. I've got the certificate, but I've just not got the little badge, so to speak. So I'll just have to. I am a lady in waiting, so to speak.
I bet I'd be so like, oh gosh, I want this day to come.
Yeah.
It's very exciting, and it's for your whole work, is it, or is it specifically for an area?
It was for the work around domestic abuse, sexual violence, and the perpetrator work I'd done at Drive. Apparently, I didn't know who had nominated me, but they said that there was a number of nominations from different sections. So and it was like whoever had like started the ball rolling, it was like it must have been like I was stalking the cabinet office to say this woman needs it, because she said it had been rolling in over a couple of years. So I said, well, at the end of the day, I was so humbled, because, like I say, without various people in my life, I couldn't have achieved what I had achieved. I always say, there's been a team of people behind me. It's
Yeah.
not just an MBE for me. It's about all the people that I've worked with and who have been as dedicated and as professional as me. You know, they've achieved it as much as I have, really.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's amazing. I hope you get that day. You'll have to keep me posted so I can share the news with everyone. But I'm sure I will see it anyway. To be fair, well, I want to say, a huge thank you for giving up your time. I know it's valuable, and thank you for all the work that you have done in supporting, the multiple services that you've made a difference to, and probably hundreds of or thousands of women and people living in abusive relationships that you've helped. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for asking me, Jennifer. It's when I look back, I just think, so I call myself sometimes the dinosaur of the DA world, because it does seem like I've been here a very long time. But having said that, I have seen so much change for the better, and really look forward to even more enhanced support and safety measures with the DA bill that's coming in. I know it needs a few tweaks, but it's better than nothing. And it's at the end of the day, it's all moving in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine, that's reassuring for me to hear that you have seen that change over the years. And it's almost a reassurance, and I'm sure everyone else will feel that as well. So thank you once again, Vivien Bickham MBE.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to talk to you.